Welcome to Season 6 of the Art of Teaching podcast. I'm Matthew Green and I'm so grateful that you joined me today. Before we get started in this episode, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to all those of you that have subscribed, listened to and downloaded the podcast. It means the world to know that there are teachers across the globe that are finding these resources useful, so thank you. Today I have the great privilege of introducing you to a friend of mine, Greg Atwells. He's an incredible thinker, innovator, and change agent. He is the founder of an amazing organisation called Creatable. The mission of Creatable began with the underrepresentation of girls in STEM. Their goal was to ignite a passion for creative technology in young women by helping them to use technology as a tool to solve problems and express their creativity. The organisation has undergone many iterations since then and currently collaborates with global companies to shape the future of work, transferring lessons and ideas from industry to improve the way we teach and learn. I hope that you get as much out of our discussion as I did. Greg, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for having a chat with me. How are you going?
Doing well, thanks, Matt. How are you? Is it school holidays for you yet? I shouldn't really say school holidays. The world thinks it's a holiday for teachers, but really it's just a time to catch up on admin.
Yeah, look, I'm pretty disciplined with that. Like I try and spend at least the first week not doing anything school related. But yeah, I was pretty unsuccessful at that these holidays. But Greg, quite possibly the most important question of the interview. What's your coffee order or drink of choice?
My drink of choice depends on the time of day. So if it is in the day, I'll have a long black. If it's at night time, a whiskey never ceases to disappoint.
Nice one. And is there a book or books that have caused you to stop and reconsider things? It could be professionally, personally. It's completely up to you.
Yeah, I think my all-time favorite book would be the only book I've ever read more than once, and that is A Tale of Three Kings by Gene Edwards.
Interesting. And what's the thesis of that for those people that are not familiar with it?
It basically looks at three different types of leaders.
Okay.
So I don't know, I'm sure everyone's heard of maybe King David in kind of ancient Jewish history, but looks at King Saul, King David, and then David's son Absalom as a portrait or profile of three different types of leaders and the relationship between them. And I think it's a really great book in terms of asking important questions of what kind of leader do you want to become.
Nice. And I'll make sure I'll put all of the things that we talk about in the show notes so people can check that out. I haven't read that one, but I will be ordering it pretty soon. These interviews are proven quite expensive because I get some pretty out of it. If you could have a dinner party with anybody there, who would be there? Your wonderful family, get a free seat at the table, but who else would you invite?
Okay, I'm glad you said that because the answer was going to be my wife and kids. I couldn't really imagine having a dinner party kind of without them there. Yep. But I think in terms of other people that I find interesting, my favorite, I've got a couple of favorite maybe athletes that I wouldn't mind having a chat to. So a guy called Christian Blumenfeld, who's the world triathlon champion at the moment, and Kelly Slater, who's maybe the GOAT of professional surfing, greatest of all time, is what GOAT means for anyone wondering. And then, I think maybe some world leaders at the event. So I have a lot of respect for Jacinda Ardern. I think she's very compelling as a leader. And then, you know what? I'm going to go two of my favorite actors. I'm a big Kevin Costner fan, as well as an Emily Blunt fan. So maybe those two.
It sounds like a great dinner party.
Yeah.
We'll talk about your experience at a conference with Prime Minister Ardern a little later. That's a whole podcast on itself. But we'll definitely loop back to that. Greg, what was your upbringing like, and what are you most grateful for from your parents?
Yeah, so I was like a national level swimmer growing up. So I trained with Ian Thorpe, was on a swimming scholarship at high school. My upbringing by nature was very performance oriented, and I spent a lot of time training before and after school. So I didn't have a lot of time really to get into trouble. So I was a pretty good kid. I was also raised by a single mum, who did a tremendous job of giving my sister and I every opportunity.
Yeah.
So in terms of what I'm most grateful for, in terms of my mum, she really showed me, I guess, by how she lived her life, that there's no point in waiting around to get picked by someone. It's best to just get amongst it and create opportunities by actually doing something. Yeah. And that kind of phrase comes to mind, you can only steer a moving ship. So kind of get moving, get going, start doing something. Yeah. And then things kind of unfold from there. So that was more than advice. That was how she lived her life. And I saw her do that in a way that, created a ton of opportunities for my sister and I when she was raising us on her own. And that's really sort of stayed with me.
Fantastic. And how has that impact your own approach to parenting? I know your daughter is a state swimmer. And so a lot of your work probably gets done at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Are there any other things, any other ways that your upbringing has impacted your approach to parenting and also?
Yeah. Look, I mean, maybe to get a little bit deep for a second, I think
the interview. It's 5 minutes. We're getting deep.
And I think a father's absence is just as powerful and significant as a father's presence. And so I grew up with an absent father, and that absence was very significant. It took a fair bit of heavy lifting in the counselling room to heal some of those wounds. And so I think as a parent, it's made me really wholehearted in my commitment just to be present and available for my kids. Not just to be there, but here, if that makes sense. And I think there's a lot of power in what that looks like day to day. So you're right. I spend a lot of time, particularly with my oldest daughter, driving her to swimming training at some ungodly hour of the morning. So 4:15, we wake up every day. And so we get a lot of time together in the car, and I just try and be super present and interested in her and what she cares about, what she wants to want to talk about. So that's influenced me a lot.
Yeah, and I think being present is so important, and I think something that I have really struggled with. I mean, it's very easy even now to think about the other things that you got to do. You got the bills to pay and the rego to pay for and the kitchen to clean, but I think it's a discipline I think I'm getting better at, which is to try and be in the moment. And being a parent's hard. It's tough because I shouldn't say it's tough. It's by far the hardest thing I've ever done, but also by far the most rewarding. And so any advice on how to raise girls as they get older, please let me know. I got 2 of them and we're still trying to work it out. So is there something you've changed your mind about most recently?
Yeah, look, I mean, what comes to mind is I would call myself a feminist now. It's not that I never was. I was just indifferent to it when I was younger. And I think a combination of seeing my own, like the tenacity and consistency of my mum kind of turning up every day. I got myself kind of better educated by going to uni, and I really loved all the art subjects and particularly ones that grappled with things like, gender theory and all that.
Yeah.
And then I married a really strong woman for myself. And I think all of those things kind of caused me to become much more aware than I was.
Yeah.
And then I had two daughters, which obviously made gender inequality quite personal, brought it close to home. So I guess you could say I've evolved in my thinking to the point where I genuinely believe that gender equality isn't just a woman's issue; it's a human issue, and as a man, I've got a role to play in that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, and thank you for your honesty. Greg, what were you like at school? And I know you mentioned a little bit about that, but what were you like at school? And also, was there a teacher or teachers that had an impact on your life?
Yeah, look, everyone remembers their favorite teacher, don't they?
They do, yeah.
So before I get to her, at school, like I was a good kid. I was pretty like enthusiastic, up for learning. I got bored quite easily, if I wasn't being stretched or pushed, I would get bored and tend to sort of check out, So I wasn't like a super amazing performing kind of student, but I was definitely pretty capable. And then, yeah, obviously sport played a big role, and was a big part of the reason, I was on a scholarship at school for swimming and all that sort of stuff. But I guess it brings me to my favourite teacher. Her name was Mrs. Ford, Elizabeth Ford. She was my year 11 and 12 music teacher. I went to Innovator High School down here in the Sutherland Shire. And Mrs. Ford, I only started learning music late in school. All my mates were good musos. They were part of a band, and I guess I just wanted to do what they could do. And so I decided to do music in year 11, even though I couldn't really play an instrument. It was going to be the subject that I dropped. And I found myself really enjoying it, but I was by far the worst in the class at the skill comparative to the other students. But my teacher, Mrs. Ford, she never made me feel like an imposter. I always felt like I belonged in that room. And she encouraged me to just go at my own pace and kind of, walk my own path. Mm. And she obviously saw something in me and helped me see it as well. So I would say that she really ignited my own belief in myself that I was a creative person and that I could actually learn how to get good at this, and so that influenced the trajectory of my life. I finished school and I spent all my 20s and early 30s, writing songs, releasing albums, playing in different bands. Like it's been a massive part of my life. And so, you talk about teachers and the role that they play in changing the trajectory of young lives. I would say Mrs. Ford really set me on a different trajectory.
Yeah. Have you had the opportunity to thank Mrs. Ford?
Yes, on more than one occasion. I think I've maybe thanked her too much now, but I've definitely made it known the role that she played in my education and then my development as a person.
Yeah, that's so important. And I had the huge privilege of interviewing that teacher for me, Mrs. Taylor Jones. She was on the podcast a little while ago, and it's really hard to put into words what great teachers do. And I didn't tell her this, but I have no idea what she taught me in her year 3 class. Like, I don't remember if it was about, I don't know, the area of 2D shapes or whatever that may be, but I remembered how she made me feel when I walked into the classroom. And was that similar to Mrs. Ford? Like, did she have a presence? Did she have an ability to speak into your life? Or what was, how did she make you feel when you were in a class?
Yeah, it's a really good distinction. I have more to say on that in a second. But in terms of how Mrs. Ford made me feel, I sort of touched on it before. I guess I always felt like I belonged. So here's the thing. I didn't feel like I needed to fit in, but I always felt like I belonged.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's an important distinction. Like we don't want to create, um, you know, like we don't want everyone to be the same. We want people to be unique and to bring their uniqueness to the table. And so I didn't feel this pressure that I needed to be like everyone else in the class, and that I could be myself and that I could be different, and bring my uniqueness to the table. But in that same breath, I always felt like I just belonged there. And I think it's an interesting tension to manage. Is how do we encourage difference and diversity and uniqueness, whilst maintaining an environment, of belonging. And I think that was just so powerful because I felt like I belonged. Everything else, like I was engaged. I wanted to be there. I found learning easier. I was able to bounce back from failure more quickly because I just felt like I belonged in that classroom. And it's a funny too, because a book I read, called Integrity by Dr. Henry Cloud talks about whenever we move through an organization, we leave a wake behind us. And just like a boat leaves like two ripples of water, like the wake behind us, we leave a task wake and a relational wake.
Wow.
And the task wake is like, what did I accomplish? Like, what did I do while I was there? Like, what did I get done? And the relational wake is, how did I make people feel? And some of us are good at, I'm more task oriented, and there are people out there that are more, people oriented. And so we definitely swing more to one than the other, but it's really important that we're mindful of both wakes. And I think you're exactly right. When we remember back to our education and we remember the teachers that had a big impact on us, it's actually less about the content and the information. We don't really retain that, but we definitely remember how they made us feel. And I think that part of teaching deserves extra special focus.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And some of these things are really hard to measure. I think in some ways our industry is obsessed with measurement and impact, and that stuff's important. But how do you measure these little things? I mean, how do you measure the impact that someone like Mrs. Ford had on your life? And I think it's hugely important. And speaking of incredible individuals, tell me about the Social Good Summit in Australia. And if you look on your website, which I'll put links into, I'll put into the show notes, there's a picture of you, and then there's a picture of the amazing Jacinda Ardern. So what was that like? And yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, so it was actually over in New York. So the Social Good Summit kicks off the United Nations General Assembly every year. And in 2018, I was asked to speak at the Social Good Summit on why more diversity in tech means bigger futures for everyone. That was a big focus of Creatable, which is the organization I lead. That was a big focus of ours at the time. How do we get more young women pursuing technology pathways? And had the opportunity to travel to New York 2018 and speak at the United Nations General Assembly. And Jacinda spoke just before me. So we actually had a chat in the green room just as she came off stage. And I was on kind of just after her. So that was, a pretty incredible opportunity. And a big part, I guess, of, I spoke before about, how I've kind of come to become somewhat of a feminist as I've gotten older. And I think a lot of the time I get to speak to people, it ends up being about, how we can overcome bias with intentional positive action. It's just a privilege and an opportunity to be able to have the opportunity to speak about it in any context. But that was pretty fun getting to go over there.
You talk obviously a lot about music education, and then your involvement in Creatable Future and tech and engaging women in female creative technologists. Like there seems to be two disciplines that I would not expect to put together, which is music and creativity and tech. And tell me about some of the parallels between some of those two disciplines and how one potentially serves the other.
Yeah, well, I think what I started Creatable in the beginning of 2017, and we began specifically and originally to address the gender disparity in tech. So we began by essentially building out a creative technology education program for high school girls.
Yeah.
And that saw me, like I'm not a professional or qualified teacher. Like I have a master's level of education, but not in education. So I did a comms degree, and then I did a master's in organizational leadership. But I haven't come from kind of, school land. I'm not a chalky by trade. And I found myself wanting, though, to lean into this problem of how do we ignite a passion for creative technology in young women, because I saw that the world needed that problem to be solved. Just getting amongst it and spending a lot of time trying to get and hold the attention of 15-year-old girls in high schools for sort of 3 to 4 years, like myself personally, I realized that two of the biggest barriers for young women getting into technology were they didn't think it was cool and they didn't think they could do it. So there was a relevance gap, and there was a capability gap. Like they didn't think that it was relevant to them. Like you talk about something like coding, a lot of young women were like, I just don't see how this is relevant to me or my future. Yeah. And then they felt like they needed to be geniuses in order to do it. So it felt really inaccessible. And so a big part of like our philosophy around teaching this was that context is everything. So teaching the skill, say something like coding, without context or without the context it's being used in, basically makes the skill feel irrelevant. And so we had great success teaching technology in the context of creativity and in the context of industry. So, for example, it's my belief that coding, for example, is a way to express my creativity, just like playing the guitar is, or doing a painting or any sort of, when we think of creativity, we think of the arts. But it's my belief that technology is just a tool that we can use to express our creativity. So that was a big part of how we taught tech. We dropped words like STEM. They sounded boring, and instead we replaced them with phrases like creative technology, because we believed it was creativity first with technology in pursuit. And then the other key part to context is, how's it being used? How is this skill being used in the real world? And so, for example, like understanding how a company like Spotify is using data to personalize music playlists and influence what you listen to, means that maybe these equations that I'm learning in maths could cause me to work on algorithms that bring creativity and technology together in music. And so what's felt boring at first, by teaching it in context of not only creativity but also industry, all of a sudden it's way more relevant, way more interesting, way more engaging. And that's essentially what Creatable's always tried to do. And then you start to see, well, I've obviously got this kind of creative part to who I am that gets expressed not just in music but also just in general problem solving. Like I like solving hard problems, and have spent my career doing so. And then as I've learnt more and more into education, it's showing that this technology is just a tool. The higher order skill here is creativity. That's really what we need to be cultivating, and because the skills, the tools come and go, like they change. Like you could spend all year teaching a certain coding program or in a specific language, And then, in 3 years' time, it's irrelevant because everyone's coding in a different language now, and it's like the tools come and go, but it's that, it's the higher order stuff, the creativity, being evaluative, being reflective, being imaginative, being curious. That's the stuff that's way more interesting to me. And I think all teachers already value it. And that's what we want to really focus on cultivating.
Yeah, and look, there's so much in that, Greg. It's almost a whole nother episode in itself. Well, it definitely is. It's a whole series on creativity. Greg, we're pretty obsessed with measurement in education, and do you think we should be measuring creativity, and if we are, how do we do such a thing?
Yeah, you're touching on a pretty hot topic, I reckon, and that is, are we measuring what we value, or are we valuing what we measure? In education today, there is a high level of measurement for things like literacy, numeracy, attendance, and behaviour. This is super useful and important, but we all know as educators that there's much more to education than that. And so the question becomes, well, how do we measure the other things that we value as teachers? And I guess you could say that we at Creatable are on a journey to discover maybe what else we should be measuring and how we should measure it in an accessible and objective way. And the more that we work with successful industry partners, so like big kind of global, like we're working with people like Atlassian and Meta, Spotify and Lego. The more we work with companies like this, the more evident it becomes that there are a set of kind of global capabilities or skills that they are wanting in people that they're employing. And, as students leave school, they need kind of global skills to solve global problems. And so, what are these skills? And then how do we measure them? And so we actually have a hypothesis here. We base all of our professional learning around 4 skill development themes and 8 skills. So our 4 themes are truth in the new world is one of them, which is all around data, bias, and managing information. And the 2 skills that sit under that are evaluative and influential. The next one is navigating future complexity. That's the theme, which is all around kind of problem solving, creativity, and thinking critically. And the 2 specific skills that sit under that are being imaginative and curious. The third theme is overcoming contextual cop-out and other convenient excuses. And that's all around like self-awareness, active listening, and responding to context. And the 2 skills that sit under that being reflective, but also persevering. And then the last theme is action for a better tomorrow. So empathy, equity, saving the world. And the 2 skills that sit under that are compassionate and just. And so if I said to you, when our students leave school, we want them to be more evaluative, more influential, more imaginative, more curious, more reflective, more persevering, more compassionate, and more just. Everyone would agree, like they're things that we already value, and they're the things that these big companies are looking for when they're hiring people. But they're things that are challenging to measure, and we don't really have a way to measure these things that's accessible and objective at the moment. And that's a big project of ours. We are working on building an assessment tool that measures some of these qualities or attributes at the moment, because we believe that they're important. And if we can empower schools with a way to baseline and then kind of measure improvement in these skills, they start to become a bigger part of the conversation and a bigger priority kind of in the educational landscape.
Yeah, it's super exciting, Greg. And I think that these are essential conversations that schools should be having. And I love that you are not from an educational background, but yet you are still asking these questions of schools, because I think one of the things that has been missing for so long is that partnership between our education systems and also private entities outside of that. And I love that you're partnering with some huge names to really build those skills. And I'm particularly love that there's a focus on empowering women. I think that's incredibly important. Sorry, Greg. Yep.
Well, I was just going to say, well, like to actually use some educational literature here, like John Hattie, what works best in education. He says that for professional learning communities to be effective, they need to continually focus on improving student outcomes and include experts who will challenge entrenched beliefs.
Love that.
And I think that's a big part of our ethos at Creatable is we want to introduce some experts into the conversation who will challenge entrenched beliefs of educators. And so much of PL at the moment lives and dies inside the education bubble. We learn from educators about educational literature on how to educate better. And so Creatable wants to look maybe where others aren't, or maybe where others don't have time to look, which is industry, and go, well, what makes these big companies so successful? And how can we apply that to teaching and learning in order to better prepare students for success after school? And so that's kind of the space that we're wanting to play in. And I think it's really important that we include those experts who will maybe challenge those entrenched beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Greg. And I just wondering if you wouldn't mind having a quick chat about initiating change and what are some of the challenges. I know that my industry is particularly slow when it comes to change. So how do we do this in a way that is done effectively and in a way that takes everyone along the journey with us?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about change in environments that are highly structured, accountable, and regulated, it's almost dangerous to try and change too quickly in these sorts of environments because they're not built for rapid iteration. Change kind of has to be slow, which means that it's probably not worth trying to change peripheral things that don't really make a difference over the long term.
Yep.
If you're going to commit as an institution to the journey of, maybe change isn't the best word. Like when I think of maybe sustainable change, I think of the word transformation. And so, if you're going to commit to that journey of transformation, I think you've got to look at things that live and breathe at the belief level, not just the behavior level. Beliefs shape culture, and then culture shapes behavior. And so we've got to make sure that we're transforming at our most fundamental level, which is what we believe. And so I would encourage anyone listening that if you're leading change within an ecosystem, within a complex ecosystem, you first have to change what you believe as a school, and then the cultural and behavioral change that you need will kind of follow suit. But a lot of the time we don't really address what we believe. We focus on behavioral things, and then it becomes really hard to implement because not everyone's kind of really bought into it and is kind of coming along for the journey.
Yeah, that's so true. And I recently did an interview with Professor Vivian Robinson, and she is phenomenal. And she was talking about the difference between change and improvement. And I think sometimes we get a little obsessed with change because it feels good to be able to be doing something. But sometimes we can lose the focus on what is going to be the thing that actually improves. I mean, we can redecorate a classroom, or we can laminate this and do that and redo our seating. But is that the thing that's actually going to drive improvement? And
well, it's because at the end of the day, like that sort of change, like transformation, it requires a shift in thinking or mindset. It's more than just like adapting to context or to a crisis. Like this is learning to think from a totally different premise or paradigm. And so that's hard enough, like for one person to do. But imagine how challenging that then becomes when an organization or a collective group of people has to kind of go on that journey.
Yeah.
And I think like I've heard a phrase around leading change called concentric circles of influence.
Yeah.
And so and our head of operations at Creatable does this so well. Basically, announcing shifts or changes in concentric circles of influence. So maybe starting with a small kind of executive group and kind of getting them to really hash it out and buy in. And then from there, going to a group that's maybe a little wider in reach and influence, and then doing the same thing there. And then from there, kind of going again. So every time you go to a new group of people and try and lead them through a shift in thinking or some sort of change, you've already got an influential group that's advocating and on your side for what you're trying to do. And I think that's really important. It slows the process down, but ensures that there's kind of commitment and buy-in every time stuff kind of gets put on the table to be discussed. And so rather than just kind of, announcing that this is what's happening, this is where we're going, everyone get on board, like that doesn't really work anymore. I don't know if it ever did, but we relied on it a lot in the past.
Yeah, it seems like things like psychological safety and trust and self-reflection and all of these things which we talk about are absolutely essential when it comes to building cultures of change.
Yeah, there's a really good book called The 5 Dysfunctions of Team by Patrick Lencioni. And he talks about the core or foundational dysfunction of any team is the absence of trust. And so, when there's an absence of trust, you have a group of people that can't be vulnerable. And therefore, you can't really have productive conflict. There's an artificial harmony that happens. And then because there's an artificial harmony, there isn't really any buy-in on decisions because no one's really hashing it out. No one's feeling heard. And because of that, there's not a healthy culture of accountability. People get more concerned with things like status over like results for the team. And then, then it just kind of goes from there. So it all kind of stems from this idea of how do we create a team or a culture or an ecosystem where there's trust, and that, I think that's fundamentally important. Yeah.
So practically, how do you try to do that at Creatable Future? How do you try and create these opportunities where you can build trust, but also have opportunities for productive conflict?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think trust is highly relational in nature. And I would say that it gets strengthened with intangibles like character. So if you're like, you need to spend time with people, like you need to actually invest into the person. It can't just be about the work. People need to know that you believe in them and that you're for them and that you want them to succeed and that it's safe for them to take risks and for things to not go to plan and for that to be okay. So that's really important. But then, like, if you're not operating in a way that is kind of good character, like if you're over promising and under delivering, or if you're not doing what you said you were going to do, like if there are sort of deficits there in terms of character, that will erode trust within a team. And so it's kind of this combination of relationship and character that I think kind of builds trust within a team. And both those things need to be given attention. So for me, I'm highly task oriented. I'm one of those people that if we start talking, I'm straight to business. Like, let's kind of talk about kind of what needs to happen and what needs to get done. But I've had to really evolve over the years, particularly in my role as the leader, to invest a lot more time cultivating kind of authentic relationships, and actually spending time with my team in a way that really focuses on them and invests into them as people.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's really important when it comes to building trust.
So if we were to get somebody from Creatable Future on the line, what do you think they would say about your leadership and the culture of that place, being very, very vulnerable at the moment?
Yeah, what they would say, I think, I reckon we've got a pretty good sort of fabric of trust within the team. I mean, it's one of our values. Like you know, you can't teach without trust. Is one of our values. The other one of our values is act like I don't know it all. And so this idea of like, you know, argue like you're right, but listen like you're wrong. And I think we practice that pretty well. You know, we put our ideas forward with passion and gusto, but then we zip our mouths and we listen as though we're wrong, and we listen for respectful dissent. And so I think as a result. And then we celebrate it when, you know, people have the confidence and the courage to kind of call each other out. Like I just reflected this morning, we do a thing where we do like an impact retro. So we go, last week, what were the meetings or the individual contributions that we felt like moved us forward the most in terms of our mission? And one of the things that I reflected on this morning was we've got a kind of junior producer in the team, and a bunch of times last week I was trying to insert myself into certain meetings and certain discussions because I was passionate about, you know, the piece of work. But she kind of confidently yet politely just sort of said, "No, Greg, it's cool. We don't need you," you know. And I really appreciated the fact that she did that, because I could have just got in there and actually slowed things down or complicated things. But she just said, "No, we're good. We don't need you yet. You know, just like stay away." And I celebrated that today. You know, I was like, that was awesome. We need to make sure that we've got the confidence and the courage to be able to do that for each other, because otherwise we'll find ourselves in unnecessary meetings or, you know, just in, you know, getting in each other's way. And so I think it's just one of those things where with culture, you kind of get what you accept, and you encourage what you call out. And so it's just calling out those things that you want to become kind of more of the way that we do things around here, you know, making sure that the wider team know that that's the stuff that's to be celebrated.
So what do you, firstly, I think that just says so much about the culture of your workplace that somebody can turn around to their boss and say, "Look, it's all right, Greg, we're good here." I don't know. I think I would like to say that I would respond to that really well, but I think inside there may be a conflict of my own ego there. But I think it's really wonderful that somebody can say that. That's fantastic. And so in terms of considering like what leadership is then, what do you see your central role in the organization to be?
Yeah, I think, you know, early on in my career, I would have defined leadership as going first, embodying how, and imparting why. But I think now I'd say that leadership is primarily concerned with cultivating ecosystems and not managing programs.
Right.
Like leadership at the end of the day is influence, but the job of a leader, and my job in particular at Creatable, is to influence culture, which is the way that we do things around here. But it's paying particular attention to the ecosystem. And that's tough because you've got to constantly pay attention to an ecosystem, whereas a program can be left alone a little bit. You know, it can kind of run itself. And so, you know, just like a gardener is constantly kind of tending to the garden, you know, and all the ecosystem that is kind of going into the growth of these plants. that's essentially what kind of leading an organization is like, really. It requires constant attention. Yeah.
I think that I don't necessarily have any answers to these questions I'm asking you. I just think it's interesting to hear your view and to hear your perspective. So thank you so much for your vulnerability. Greg, I do want to be respectful of your time, so I've just got a couple of questions for you, and then we'll talk about where people can find out more about the amazing work that you're doing. What do you think the current COVID-19 pandemic has taught us about the way that we do schools and the way that we implement learning systems? And are you confident that we can learn from these lessons?
Yeah, this is a big question. Education is so much more than content and information. If it wasn't, Zoom lessons and worksheets would have worked much better than they did during lockdown. Education is deeply human, and I believe it happens in the relationship between teacher and student.
Yeah.
It's skills, not content, and we actually really need teachers to contextualize those skills, model them, and create environments for students to practice and improve. And so I think COVID helped parents realize the significant role that teachers play in the life of their, kids' development. I think that, that's definitely, at least in our household, that was really kind of brought home. But I think maybe at a system level, COVID presented schools with maybe a new challenge, and that was, how do we plan in a volatile environment where things can change in an instant? Like, how do we navigate an uncertain future? Because we just didn't know when kids were going to get sent home and kind of what was happening. It was really hard to plan. Now, a lot of the companies that we work with have a long history in being able to do this. Like, they started as startups, and they're constantly having to plan and navigate in uncertainty. They've had to in order to survive. But bureaucracies and kind of well-established institutions definitely have a harder time. And so I think moving forward, learning how to do this better will be a big challenge for schools moving forward. How do we plan and navigate kind of an uncertain future? And how do we teach our students the skills to be able to do that for themselves as well?
Yeah. Do you think that we will, as education systems, jump back to old habits, or do you think we can actually learn some valuable lessons from this time?
I think we'll try to jump back to old habits, but I don't think they'll work anymore. And so I think we're going to be forced to evolve. And I genuinely believe that to the degree that we can get industry and education working more closely together, like at the same table, to kind of equip students with the skills that they need to navigate this uncertain future, I think to that degree we can innovate and really evolve. The education system has evolved in the past. Like, it hasn't always been this way, and it can evolve again. But I think that it's evolved really well in the past when because here's the thing, right? Society, the needs in society change, and therefore industry has to change in order to meet those societal shifts. And as industry changes, it looks to education to evolve in order to prepare the workforce of tomorrow with the skills that it needs. And so industry and education have always worked together. They've been in lockstep before. I think the only thing that's different today is the pace of change is now happening so much faster. And so what's happening is the lag between the two is just getting bigger. Everyone's trying to move forward, but it's the pace at which different entities are moving forward that's the issue. And so I think by getting education and industry kind of working closely together and maybe learning from each other in a mutually beneficial way, I think we can shorten the lag between the two, to make sure that, students are equipped with the skills that they need to succeed when they leave school. Because, the future of work is rapidly evolving and the criteria for success is shifting. And so we're going to have to evolve as an education system in order to meet the challenges of tomorrow.
Yeah. And Greg, I think your perspective as an industry representative is so important. My view is that we need more voices like yours to help us do our job. And we also need, I would imagine, you would need voices like ours to be able to do our job better. And so I'm really excited to have these discussions about with you, because even though you didn't become a teacher, or you haven't necessarily had extensive periods inside the classroom, that's kind of the point. We need to have people that are not part of the system, so to speak, to be able to help us change and to be able to make a difference in the lives of young people. So I'm hugely grateful, Greg, for the work that you're doing and Creatable Future is doing to help bridge that gap and also to support some of the learners of the future. Where can people find out more about you and the amazing work that you're doing? Where can people get in touch with you?
Yep. So if you want to learn more about Creatable, you can head to our website, creatablefuture.com. The reason why the future's in there is we believe at the end of the day that a better future is creatable, but that better future starts with a better education. And so that's kind of why we exist. So creatablefuture.com, if you want to learn more about, what we do for teachers and school leaders. But personally, I'm on all the socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. So Greg Atwells, you'll be able to find me on all of those.
Fantastic. Well, Greg, like I said, I'll make sure I put all of the resources and things that we talked about in the show notes. But I'm hugely grateful for you taking the time to talk with me today, and also for the amazing work that you're doing in the educational space. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt. Pleasure.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Art of Teaching podcast today. I hope that you, like me, got some valuable insights out of our discussions. For show notes, please visit theartofteachingpodcast.com. And I've also created a private Facebook group where we can continue the discussion there. The link will be in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and can't wait to see you for next week's episode.